Is Florida State getting a raw deal with its out-of-state grant of rights case?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To Locked On Seminoles, I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Please hit that like button and subscribe, rate, and review. Truly appreciate you coming in to check out what's going on with the Seminoles. Today's show is going to be an interesting one, as the court cases that I've been examining over time are getting a little more predictable in a bad direction. We're going to go over that here in just a second. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Let's jump in here. The overview, and this is always confusing because it's law. I'm just going to throw that out there from the get-go, is that there are multiple court cases involving Florida State against the ACC and vice versa in North Carolina and Florida. But here's the other catch. As I'm going through reading different information, quotes from judges, etc., there's also information about Clemson, who has pretty much the same court case and maybe even deeper, if you will, against the ACC. There is a judge, and I'm going to read a bunch of quotes momentarily, in North Carolina that used an extremely touchy word that gives me a lot of pause. In writing, especially academic writing, the words only, never, always, any kind of word that is exclusive is very dicey. To be able to prove that is extremely difficult, most often when you have to cite sources, etc. You can apply that in large part to the court of law. The word only was used, and again, I'll come back around to that momentarily with some quotes and some different things. But there's a judge that is talking about the Clemson case, etc., and kind of the whole thing, all the shenanigans going on with all this lawsuits, saying it has to be decided only in like North Carolina. At least that's how I'm interpreting it overall. But there is no one state. While I understand the theory that it would be great, it's not realistic. It would be great if it was in one, but all these situations are different because the ACC is based in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, in North Carolina. Clemson's in South Carolina, and Florida State is in Florida. This will be messy. This will not be a friendly, easygoing, swiftly moving section of court cases. This will be a clunker that is dragged along and hits every possible bump in the road, and quite frankly, could take years. So using the phrase only, or it could only be settled here, anything of that nature gives me pause. Now, first off here, before I go any further, I am not a lawyer. I have no desire to be a lawyer, but I understand writing in basic litigation. And everybody that I've spoken to that is more inclined to understand this, Bud Elliott included, nobody I know thinks this is going to go fast, but I have not heard a single person say that it can only be decided in one area. Although Bud had mentioned to me, hey, one of the first things everybody's going to try to do is get it to be in one state, and it's not going to be. He's like, that's not really realistic kind of thing is how I took it from him. But, I'll let him speak for himself on his podcast, Nolecast. Check that out if you ever get a chance, if you haven't already. It's a good pod. But it's just funny that he would just throw that in there. So I'm going to bring up the court case in question here. And this is just from the Carolina Journal. And I'm just quoting here some of the things that this judge went over. And I'll get into the names and everything specific to it. But the title gives me thought that the people writing this are very pro-ACC in this. So take it for what it's worth. Again, the title is the Carolina Journal. AC schools now 0-2 against conference in media rights fight in North Carolina courts. Okay, fair enough. A few of the main points here get into how they're rejecting Clemson, etc. That's kind of the overview, but I want to get to the quotes. North Carolina Business Court Judge Louis Bledsoe, again, this is the person in question, he has a 53-page order Wednesday granting part of Clemson's request to dismiss the ACC's legal claim. This is from last week. Bledsoe also refused to dismiss the lawsuit in its entirety. He also rejected Clemson's motion to stay the proceedings in the North Carolina case. that would be kind of the same. Like if they do it with one, they're going to do it with the other. So you can substitute Clemson with Florida State, in my opinion. But just hear me out. Here's the quote. The only court, notice that word only, that has jurisdiction over Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC, and thus the only court that can assure a consistent, uniform interpretation of the grant of rights agreements in the ACC's constitution and bylaws, the determinations at the core of the pending actions is a North Carolina court, Bledsoe wrote. You got to be kidding me. We're the only ones. I mean, that's an arrogant take. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would love for some lawyer to comment on that. Like, that is a very bolden statement. Only? Why? So I'll continue on. The Florida court in Florida action cannot bind Clemson to South Carolina. The South Carolina court in South Carolina cannot bind Florida State to Florida. Continuing, each of these courts and this court could reach conflicting conclusions about the same terms of the same North Carolina contracts upon which the pending actions rest, and in doing so create procedural chaos and tremendous confusion at a time when ACC, FSU, and Clemson need binding clarity concerning their rights under the ACC's most important contracts with its members, the judge continued. Okay, that may be true, that it could be very difficult, but when is law not? Like, are you trying to take ingredients out of this? I mean, that's just not realistic. Well, we just want it to be easier, so this is the only one that matters. That is ignorant. I'm not a lawyer, but it's obvious that there's some bias here towards North Carolina that goes beyond just appreciation for where he works, etc. It is absurd. Only a North Carolina court, most likely in a single consolidated action in North Carolina, can render consistent, uniform determinations binding ACC, Florida State, and Clemson concerning the documents that are at issue in all 4 pending actions, Bledsoe added. I can go on and on here. You could, again, this is from the Carolina Journal. If you want to look it up, I could read the whole thing. It's infuriating to me. And I'm not a law guy, so I don't cover it much here on Locked On Seminoles. But this particular judge, I think, is going to get a lot of pushback. And it's best for FSU fans to read it, even though it's a lot of Clemson stuff too, because the two are joined, whether they want to say they are or aren't, because they're both trying to get the same deal taken out, and that's the grant of rights against the ACC. But if you are going to say only, it has to be in precedent on something. You can't just have that opinion because you feel that way. Your comfort zone is there. That's my interpretation. Again, if lawyers want to argue against that, fire away. Comment on the YouTube page. I would love to hear what you have to say. If you agree with it, disagree with it, anywhere in between, I would love to hear those thoughts. But again, you're going to have different opinions. For instance, in the state of Florida, there could be a judge that rules for or against Florida State in regards to how the action has been taken so far, and they're trying to cause problems for Florida State, and they do another lawsuit saying they're trying to defame them or anything else. And they could have a different interpretation of it if that same lawsuit was in North Carolina. It's just the way it is. People interpret law differently in different states. That you're not going to get uniformity across 3 states on a very complex issue. That's not realistic. And that's what he's saying. Only? I mean, and just as it relates, to be more specific, to the grant of rights, judges are going to look at that differently. That's why the resolution is still all parties involved, meaning Clemson, FSU, and the Atlantic Coast Conference, just agreeing on a number, because you're probably never going to get only as a circumstance. It's not realistic. It's just not. People argue over politics and law nonstop. If you haven't seen the local newspaper or anything online, I'm sure you might have seen something about a person getting shot recently. There's a lot of discourse about where that is and what should have been said and not said. It's just, that's the nature of human beings. So this is really funny to me that he went on record like that. He didn't have to, but he can do whatever he wants. But I just think that's going to backfire on the ACC at some point. That seems really unreasonable to me. Again, last time, if you're a lawyer or somebody that has dealt with something like this, I would truly like for you to comment. What is it that you think is fair? for lack of a better term, or unfair in regards to the word only in North Carolina having it being the only state? Why are they? Whatever angle you want to take, fire away. I'm curious, and normally, I am not a law guy. This fascinates me because I cannot believe this is going to be welcomed in any such case for any school, because once you go down just one path, this is the only way we can do it. That's going to alienate a lot of different people in a lot of different circumstances. Next up on Locked On Seminoles, we're going to talk about Haynes King, the quarterback for Georgia Tech. Why I might have overevaluated him as a possible breakout guy this year. He actually might be trending in the wrong direction. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to United States customers. I did some more examining of Haynes King, and I was wrong. Straight up, that's the first point here. If you're going to take nothing else from this part of the show, I was wrong. And it's because of the totality of what he did last year. For the record, this is a bizarre combination of stats. Haynes King led the ACC in touchdown passes. Good stat, right? 29. That's pretty good. He also led the league in picks at 16. Now, I've mentioned that before, but you have to go inside the details. The devil's in the details. I'm sure many of you have heard that old expression. With King, it's a pretty good expression to go into. I've got a couple bullet points here I'm going to use, and then I'm just going to read off some stats from CFB. By the way, if you don't use cfbstats.com, it's free. You probably should. It's very, very easy. Situational, game by game, percentages on third down. There's all kinds of things you can look at. Today, I'll dive even deeper into King at a later episode, but today I'm going to focus a little bit on the last 4 games, kind of compare it to the early part of the season. I'm trying to figure out, before I even go into the film, what in the world happened, because he started really hot, and then, boy, you talk about fade. Haynes King did. So I have questions, and again, comment as you see fit. If you watch some of the Georgia Tech games, whatever, this is just bizarre to me. So that game is just over a month away. Remember now, that's like the first game of the season, I believe. You know, college football. If I'm wrong, so be it. But I don't believe so. That is a really important thing to think about, because his last 4 games, as I'm going to show you, not exactly where you want to be for any quarterback at any level. So the last 4 games, here are the teams before I read the stats. On the 11th of November, they played at Clemson, obviously, very difficult venue. Home game the next week against Syracuse. They played Georgia at home, and then they played UCF in the bowl game. Now, it's obvious which 2 of those 4 have different level of defenses, Clemson and Georgia. But just listen to the stats, and again, I'm just going to go in order. Clemson, Syracuse, Georgia, UCF. Against Clemson, they got smoked. He even rushing the football, I'm looking at the rushing stats. Clemson just ate him alive. It's the only game where he really tried to run and just was completely annihilated. I'm guessing up front they got destroyed. And keep in mind, in college football, sacks count against rushing totals, which is something I would love to do an entire podcast on because it's dumb. The NFL doesn't do it that way. They got it right. But he had 11 carries for -3. I'm guessing Clemson sacked him like 5 times, which also brings up the point. With Florida State's front, do you really think Georgia Tech's going to handle them? I doubt it. But he also had 82 yards the next week against Syracuse. Not a good defense, but he's probably pretty healthy to run for that. So mobility wasn't the issue. The O-line is. Put that on the back burner. Against Georgia, only 24 yards rushing. And then against UCF, he had 12 carries for 89 yards. Against quality defenses, he is not going to beat many squads. Louisville had a decent game. He had 10 carries for 53 yards to start the year, but he's healthy. They didn't know what they were going to do with him. It was first time playing for Georgia Tech. They didn't have a game plan to see him. Again, beginning of the year good. As he went on, things went downhill. The only team that he really destroyed running the ball at 150 yards on 10 carries against Boston College. I assume he had a 50 or 60-yard run or something, because that's, even for a running back, those are absurd statistics. Now, as a passer, and this is what I'm guessing most people are more interested in, but the reason I brought up rushing first is when he runs well, you're in trouble, because he can run RPO and do things. Haynes King is extremely athletic. Again, same 4 teams, Clemson, Syracuse, Georgia, and UCF to end the season. Against Clemson, he was just awful. I mean, just absolutely atrocious. 13 to 31, 41.9%. I know it's Clemson, but goodness gracious, that is putrid. 129 yards, only 4.2 yards per attempt. 2 touchdowns, but 4 picks. I want to say that again. 4 picks. That's going to hurt your total. To that point, here's a really interesting way to look at it. Haynes played 13 games last year. 9 of the 13, he had at least 1 pick, and he had 2 or more interceptions, including that abysmal performance in Death Valley, 4 of the 13 games. So he will throw it in harm's way. Let's go to the Syracuse game. Percentage was good. This is so bizarre. He almost doubled his percentage, which I don't know if I've ever said that about a quarterback from one week to the next. 16 to 20, 80%. You're thinking, oh, he's killing it. 138 yards? I mean, Georgia Tech's got some speed at receiver. They got some pretty good players. That is bizarre to me. There's going to be a reason I'm going to bring that up on why it's really not, if you look at it closer, though. 138 yards, 6.9 per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. If you see the trend here, is before I go to the Georgia stats, teams have seen him play. Early in the year, here are the first 4 games, how many yards passing he had? 313, 290, 307, 222. Then if you go to the 5th game against Bowling Green, he murdered them, and he should. 348 yards. Once teams had film of Haynes against, accommodating, like South Carolina State was the 2nd game. Okay, he threw 72%. They don't have the players to make much happen. He had 4 TDs, no picks. Okay, but it's still film these coordinators and all these analysts could look at. Do you think with Florida State's incredibly talented defensive coaching staff and all their talent, they're not going to use that and look at this stuff? I figured this out in 30 minutes or less. What's Florida State going to do in an entire offseason with a host of people? And this is kind of standard stuff anyway. They're going to murder this. He's either struggling with a specific type of zone or a fire zone. Something gives this young man a lot of problems. I haven't looked at the film, but you're getting a trend here. Georgia is probably the most difficult defense to prepare for because they run a true 3-4. You can't emulate it in practice. I kind of give him a pass on that, and they're completely out-talented, and he wasn't horrible considering what he went against, but they still lost a close game. 31-23, Georgia kind of swept through that game part of the time and had to wake up to win. But he was 11 of 20, 55%, 158 yards, 7.9, but no touchdowns. But he didn't throw a pick against Georgia's defense. That's not bad. UCF, you should murder them. I don't know if he got hurt or what. I assume he did because he was 7 out of 13. I don't know if they pulled. I don't know what happened. I didn't watch that game, but 53.8% is not great. 87 yards, 6.7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Again, I have not gone back and looked at any of the film or anything like that. But again, 2 games in a row below 60%. In the game before that, 80%, even they couldn't throw it anywhere. And the one before that is 41.9. Something went wrong. Is he hurt? That's possible as well. And I'll say this again. All coaches lie about injuries. Haynes King, Georgia Tech's not going to give you, like, especially if he's got a bum shoulder or something, 0 chance they're giving you that information at a press conference. For those of you that gamble, never listen to injury reports. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. They will lie. So with that being stated, the back 4 games, man, are bizarre because, like, Syracuse and UCF can't play defense. They can't. And he didn't do much against them either. Now that the film's out, and of course, again, you got the injury factor with the asterisk, I think Florida State's going to have a field day with whatever it is they need to do. And again, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to watch some of the game, maybe the UCF game, see if he got banged up, whatever. I don't remember. But even Georgia, the Georgia Tech game, you can look it up on YouTube TV, whatever. That's a really interesting way to do this. Is he struggling with zone? Is it man? What is it? Because his numbers just like got cut in half. I have a feeling, I think the spread is around 12 for the Florida State game against Georgia Tech. That spread might grow. And I don't normally say things, and I'm not a gambling guy, but like looking at those numbers, like just as a blind faith, with Florida State's secondary, as talented as it is, getting Marvin Jones and these guys coming after him, you still got Patrick, you got Big Darrell in the middle, Farmer. He could be in for a rough day. I think there's a good chance Florida State houses him now. I didn't think that at all before today. Just saying. Coming up next on Locked On Seminoles, going to talk about a recruit that I think is very important for the 26 class, as well as a thought on 2025 running back recruiting. There are a couple guys still in the mix, and Florida State has a great chance. Need to get at least one of them. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. If Florida State is to complete their 25 recruiting class to the best of their ability, and this goes for pretty much any year, you need at least one high-quality running back. Last year, Cam Davis signed with the Noles, and that's an elite player. I'm just going to use him as an example. If you get a kid like that in a class, you're good. And Florida State got more than one running back. I've got a versatile guy, too. They're in great shape. But you still, as an objective goal, each year want to get one guy that's a dude. That way, because it's position of attrition, you just want to stack talent, you want to keep talent away from your opposition, all those things. I got to become friends with Cam since his freshman year, and I asked him one time, like, any other guys coming up in your area, anybody good, just kind of general conversation. Immediately, Cam brought up Osmond Croma. This is a kid that Florida State wants, that Tennessee wants, that Georgia wants, that Miami wants. All these different schools coming out the gate. Now to the bottom end of it with recruiting, it looks like Auburn, Florida State, or Georgia, depending on which kid or which site you look at or which person you talk to on or off the record, you'll get a different answer on where he's going. His recruitment is hard to follow. I've been around him several times. Great young man. But him and Cam are buddies. And Cam thought that there would be a good chance in the end, this is a year ago now, that this kid would end up playing for the Noles. Okay. There's still no decision, and there's no definitive timeline yet. He would like to have it done before the season. That's something we all know, but that's still not really concrete. And I don't think he's the kind of young man, because he looks at things from a broader perspective. Osmond's a smart kid. He might drag this out. It's possible. With that being stated, 24/7's Noel site mentioned that he's going to come to the big event at the end of the month that Florida State's having a big to do with a bunch of recruits, going to have fun and just kind of show off what Florida State is, what we can do for you. It's a pretty relaxed feeling that a lot of schools do now to kind of show what Florida State's football program and the institution is. Croma's going to be there. Keep in mind, a bunch of schools have that opportunity, and he's going to Florida State. I think that's a good sign. I have no insight. I have not spoken to him in quite a while. I have no idea. I think it was March the last time I talked to Osmond. He could go any which direction. It wouldn't surprise me because I have no personal insight on it. But it's always the same thing that I tell people with recruiting. Go by what recruits do, not what they say. If you're going to certain schools more than the other, pretty good chance that you like that institution. As we get down to the nitty-gritty, and again, Auburn, Georgia, Florida State, pick whatever order you want for those. If he's going to visit FSU, I think that's a sign for the Noles. Just my opinion. Also, that's not the only circumstance for Florida State getting a running back. There's going to be a couple kids. Let's say for the record, Osmond doesn't end up at Florida State for whatever reason. Let's just use that as a scenario. Byron Lewis is a candidate. We'll talk about him momentarily. But there's also something else. You're talking about a situation where Florida State's not stupid. You stay in contact with kids that have committed elsewhere, and you still do your due diligence with 25 running back recruits around the South. And maybe there could be a California kid that is originally from Florida that at least has an interest. They're not sure they want to pull the trigger on it. Who knows? Do not be surprised if it's not somebody other than Osmond or Byron, who we'll talk about momentarily, that ends up at Florida State. That is recruiting in 2025. I'll put it to you like this. I do a bunch of recruiting shows around the Locked On Network. One of the shows I go to a lot is Locked On Nittany Lions, Penn State. Here are some of the states that Penn State has gotten commitments from. Got a kid out of Miami, Randy Adarica, that Florida State offered early on. They got a pass rusher out of Houston. They got a corner out of Mater Dei in the greater LA area. It's arguably the best program west of the Mississippi over the last 30, 40 years. That is not normal Penn State recruiting. Florida State can be that way in a heartbeat too, because they just got a quarterback in the class of 26 from California. Anything is possible. To finish up on the running back scenario, Byron Lewis, I think that's a kid. If I had to pick which one was going to go to Florida State, I would say it's Byron. It's not as big a priority, in my opinion. This is only my opinion, for Miami to get a running back in this class, because they already got one, but a bigger back. The kid they got, Gerard Pringle, out of the Tampa area, is really good. A little different style, a little more quickness, make guys miss, but he has decent size too. They may not end up with a second back, and I think it's still going to be one of those two. Wisconsin is a possibility as well, but probably Florida State or Miami. I give the Noles the edge. Final point for today's show. I've already started scouting the 2026 class, and I'm actually, right after this podcast, going to leave to go down to Thomas County Central High School, because they've got scrimmages today and tomorrow. In the state of Georgia, it's football year-round. It's why that state is unbelievable with high school football. And by the way, that's the same high school as one Charlie Ward that won the Heisman for the Noles and won a national title in '93. This 26 group in the state of Florida is unusual from the following perspective. There are a few different guys that I'll mention at some point, but Trenton Henderson is a name that all Florida State fans need to know. One could make the argument that with the uncommitted prospects from the 26 class, the most important guy on the board for the Noles is Trenton Henderson. Who is he, and why does that matter? He is from Catholic High School in Pensacola, so it's right down the road from Florida State. It's just over 2 hours. He's a Florida State fan, and he is as naturally built to be a weak side edge rusher as one will find. He's 6'4", 6'5", 225, long arms, long legs, changes directions well, breaks down, gets after the ball carrier, even if he's originally blocked, finds his way to the football. He can drop into coverage like a safety and still turn his hips and run. It is very unusual to see kids like this. And he's a good student. Like, you cannot have enough of these kind of players at that position anyway. Florida State is after him. It's an important player. It's a kid we're going to be mentioning a lot on this podcast and probably at every Florida State podcast you come to. That is a dude. I expect him to be ranked when all the recruiting services get up to date on 26. He'll be top 100 by everybody. I'm very confident in that. There's a couple that haven't caught up yet, but we'll get to that later. Trenton Henderson. If you do not know that name, you soon will. He is an elite recruit. Once again, please like and subscribe to this podcast, rate and review, comment on the stuff with granted rights. If you're a lawyer, especially, I truly appreciate any commentary that you could give, because it's just bizarre to me. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but you start using words like only, that makes me nervous. I see bias towards your state for whatever the reason. One can speculate on that. That's one's own decision. But I don't like how that's trending. And I got a feeling this is going to be even uglier than it originally was. This has been Locked On Seminoles. I will see you soon. Might have some updates from the Thomas County Center. There's some kids Florida State is definitely after. They're going to be there, Creekside and some other schools. So it will be fun. Depending on the internet, whether or not I have a full episode on Wednesday. But we will see you soon here on Locked On Seminoles.